Good afternoon. Welcome to Utah Global Affairs Talk Series, organized by the Center for International Studies in collaborations with the Center for Corporate and Community Development, Tun Tan Cheng Lock Center for Social and Policy Studies, Utah, and Malaysian Association for American Studies. I'm Tan Wee, the chairperson for the Center for International Studies. I will be your moderator today. As we all know that Joe Biden replaced Donald Trump on 20th January 2021 to be the US new president. Considering the growing rivalry between the US and China, what is the future directions of American foreign policy under the new Biden administration? Today, we are honored to have Professor K.S. Nathan as our speaker. Professor Nathan is currently a visiting research fellow at the Institute of Ethnic Studies in the National University of Malaysia, or UKM. He holds a PhD in International Relations from Claremont Graduate University in California, US. He was a professor of international relations in the University of Malaya from 1994 to 2001, senior fellow at the Institute of Southeast Asian Studies in Singapore from 2001 to 2007, and director of the Institute of Malaysian and International Studies in UKM from 2011 to 2013. Currently, he is the president of the Malaysian Association for American Studies. He also served on the editorial board of the Australian Journal of International Affairs. Today, Professor K.S. Nathan is going to talk about the United States policy in Asia under the Biden administration. His lecture will take around 45 minutes. Then we will have a Q&A session. Please post your questions on the chat box so that we can read your questions to Professor Nathan later.
Good afternoon to all the participants who have kindly made some time to join us in this webinar, which is jointly organized by Utah and the Malaysian Association for American Studies. This topic, as you know, is very important. We want to know what the United States policy is in the region, especially when there has been a change of administration in the US from the Republican to the Democratic administration. What I hope to do is I will lay out the context for you of US policy in Asia, what are its principles, and then focus on the region itself by dividing the region into three parts. Northeast Asia, that is Japan and China, Japan, and Korea. Southeast Asia will be especially our ASEAN region. And South Asia, we will focus on India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. And I'm sure you're all interested in knowing what is now happening in Afghanistan and why the withdrawal and what is the future for Afghanistan. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me proceed. Yeah, I can share the screen also, no problem. That's good. Okay, let me quickly review US relations with Asia. The principles, of course, always drive the practice. It doesn't necessarily mean that all these principles are very faithfully followed 100%, but one does need some guiding philosophy or principles by which foreign policy is practiced. So quite clearly, as a global power, the United States is a global power. The first objective would be to maintain a balance of power in Asia, favorable to US national interests. The United States, as you know, became more actively involved in Asia after the conquest of the Philippines in 1899. You know, that conquest has to be sort of explained in terms of the Spanish-American War, where Spain lost the war. Remember, Spain was the colonial power in the Philippines, and then it handed over the Philippines to the United States following the defeat in 1899. So the United States clearly views itself as a major Asia-Pacific power with a responsibility to maintain a global as well as a regional balance of power. Based on its own colonial experience, of course, the United States supports and advocates democracy and free enterprise as the political economic models that best promote human rights and welfare. Let's now go to Southeast Asia, our own region, Cold War era, and then I lead you to the post-Cold War era, and then the Trump and Biden administrations and what comparisons we can make by way of conclusion. Now, of course, in Southeast Asia, the United States has got two allies, and they still are, Thailand and the Philippines, via the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, which was formed in 1954. And basically, this was a military alliance in order to enable the United States to engage militarily in Vietnam and to fight international communism as it saw it. So the United States was involved in Vietnam for a long period of time, more actively from 1960 to 1975. The involvement had already begun in 1954 after the French were defeated, as you know, by the North Vietnamese at Dien Bien Phu. So, but then the involvement accelerated under Kennedy, President John F. Kennedy, from 1960 to 63. He sent 16,000 US military advisors. And then that was followed by President Johnson, who further increased the troop strength to 550,000 by the end of 1968. And of course, the guiding philosophy was that there weren't enough American troops to fight the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese. That troop strength had to be increased. And so they felt that the war can only be won if the American troop strength was increased to 500,000. But however, things did not turn out necessarily the way the United States planned it. And when President Nixon took over in 1969, he had to give in to popular opposition to the war in Vietnam in American domestic politics. And as a result of which, he announced the Nixon Doctrine in 1969. Basically, this was to transfer the war burden to the local parties, that is the Vietnamese themselves. And that program was called, as you know, if you have been following the war and know about the war, it was called Vietnamization of the war. That is replacing American troops with Vietnamese troops. And also the principle of burden sharing for the rest of Southeast Asia, where the United States felt that it was also time for it not to bear the primary responsibility for the defense of its friends and allies in Southeast Asia, but to do it on the basis of burden sharing and partnership. But as you know, the casualty figures are rather high. 58,220 US soldiers died during the Vietnam War. Then, of course, in the process, the United States has also been strengthening the anti-communist number of states here in Southeast Asia. And that's basically the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, which was formed in 1967 as a bulwark against international communism. So the United States began formal relations in 1977 after it withdrew from Vietnam and concentrated more on political, economic, diplomatic, and military support for this anti-communist organization. You know, ASEAN was formed actually in 1967 in Bangkok by the Bangkok Declaration, August the 8th, if I'm not mistaken, and since then ASEAN has grown. Now, after the American pullout of Indochina, the United States, of course, declined in terms of its engagement and involvement in this region, partly because I think the region was beginning to support itself better. The region showed greater self-confidence. ASEAN grew in strength, in political stability, economic growth, and so on. And therefore, the United States felt that it was better to focus on the political diplomatic relations and strengthen the capacity of ASEAN to manage on its own its regional security. The United States also attended the US-ASEAN dialogue meetings every year, and then also began to get more involved institutionally with the association. These dialogues and these foreign ministers meetings are held on a rotational basis in different ASEAN capitals every year. US-ASEAN relations, of course, therefore have been generally stable in the post-Cold War era from 1990 to 2020. And as I mentioned earlier, ASEAN was gaining in profile and regional confidence and political stability, was able to establish very strong institutional links with all major powers via the dialogue partner relationships. This has in fact been a great strength and achievement of ASEAN, that it practiced inclusive regionalism by including all the major actors who have interests and engagement in Southeast Asia. As you can see, US, European Union, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, South Korea, China, India, and Russia. ASEAN also has a special dialogue relationship with the United Nations as an actor as well. Now, ASEAN practices inclusive regionalism. Perhaps that was also the reason why ASEAN was not seen as an organization threatening any other external power, and they were willing to become partners with the association in building regional security, stability, progress, and development. ASEAN did not pose any threat, as you know, to any external power. So following the end of the Cold War, we also know another major development with the decline of Cold War politics, the rise of multipolarity. That is to say, power centers throughout the world, new power centers that were emerging because they were free from the politics of the Cold War, and they began to chart their own course. European Union was one of them, ASEAN in Southeast Asia, China on its own, then India and South Asia. Brazil in Latin America also became very strong. They also set up their own regional associations. And in Africa too, they were developing their own regional identity and organizations to cater to new developments based on multipolarity. So in Southeast Asia, of course, ASEAN did formulate the concept of ASEAN centrality in managing regional stability and security, which is to say ASEAN will be the centerpiece of action, and all the other major powers who also contribute to security and stability in the region can play a supportive role. But the main manager will be ASEAN itself. That is ASEAN centrality. Now let's focus on US-China relations. Of course, as you know, in recent years, as China was rising, there are the good points, and there will also be some concerns about how China as a rising power will be handling itself. So subterranean tensions already had emerged in US-China relations even during the Obama administration. The US, in fact, under Obama, opposed the establishment of the AIIB, Asian Infrastructure Development Bank, AIIB Investment Bank, established by Beijing in 2014, and also lobbied its allies to decline the membership on the grounds that there were no clear governance standards. But however, even US allies felt that it was time for them to put their own national interests first. And so Britain, Australia, South Korea, even India, all of them joined the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank and became founding members of the bank, leaving the United States and Japan as bystanders. Now the US sees AIIB as challenging the Washington-based World Bank, which was established in Washington in 1994, and also the Asian Development Bank, established in Manila in December 1966. Of course, the bankrollers were basically the United States and Japan. in the ADB, more so Japan, yeah, two financial institutions with strong US and Japanese influence. Now, President Trump, like Obama before him and Biden, the successor to Trump, shared a fear that China will overtake the US as the world's #1 economic power. So you can understand why there have been these trade frictions, especially under Trump, perhaps trying to limit, the growth of Chinese power that was seen as threatening to US economic interests in the world. US-China trade deficit, you see the trade deficit always very much in favor of China, as you can see. Huge trade deficit that the US has with China. So you can look at the figures there. And this is one of the concerns causing the friction in US-China economic relations. China is exporting very much more to the US than the US is to China. So it's important to keep in mind, however, that the United States is the second largest trading partner of China. And China is the fourth largest trade partner of the United States after Canada, Mexico, and Japan. So that economic relationship is still there, the interdependence is there, but nevertheless, they are also rivals as major global powers, and their strategic interests also impinge on their economic engagement. So by the end of the Trump presidency, the bilateral relationship, as you all are aware, had deteriorated in the economic as well as strategic dimensions. The tit for tat, as we know, went on for the last 3-4 years. Both were imposing all kinds of sanctions on the other, and as a result of which, these trade frictions also spilled over into the strategic sphere, and that is in the South China Sea, where Washington, from 2000, I would say from 2010, when President Obama introduced the pivot to Asia policy, the US, which actually was very neutral about the South China Sea claims, decided that it will take a position, and that is, it became more actively involved in expressing its position on the South China Sea and opposing China's nationalizing and militarizing of the South China Sea, because China does claim 90% of the area as under Chinese sovereignty. From 2014, China clearly has been building islands and triangulating these newly formed islands, thereby reducing freedom of movement in SCS to the disadvantage of other regional claimants and external maritime powers such as the US, Japan, and Australia. Now you can see that Biden's policy was not very different from Trump's. I mean, there is a continuity in how they are viewing the South China Sea. And that is Trump, like Biden, after him, both reject Beijing's sovereignty claims of ownership of 90% of SCS. China, of course, bases its sovereignty claim on the grounds of history, but it actually started making those claims through the what you call the government of the Kuomintang only from 1947. But before that, there is no evidence of any claim by China that this South China Sea, 90% of it belongs to it. So it's a rather recent claim that China has put up. US supports the 2016 decision by the Permanent Court of Arbitration. This submission was made by the Philippines to determine the sovereignty aspects of Spratlys and the South China Sea area. And the decision was that China has no basis to make these historical claims, and that all states have freedom of movement in the South China Sea. And the South China Sea was international waters, open sea. And the US said that it will now work with other members of the Quad, that is the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, Japan, India, and Australia, to strengthen deterrence in the US. The USFO, as I've said earlier, does feel concerned about this potential threat to navigation, as the South China Sea is a critical trade route. And it considers the US involvement in the region. China considers, however, such an involvement by the US as meddling in China's internal affairs. And it sees the enhanced US military cooperation with Vietnam and the Philippines and increased Japanese military activity also in the region as part of a strategy to contain China. Biden, like Trump, has also taken a strong stand against China in the SCS. He would prefer some kind of multilateral engagement, or what I would call multilateral deterrence against China, such as using the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue. So Biden organized the first summit of Quad leaders on March 12, 2021, just a few months ago, in order that they can arrive at a common position, take a common stand vis-a-vis China's challenge in the South China Sea. Biden also is strengthening military ties with the Philippines to protect Manila's interests in the South China Sea. If you can see this map, you can see this is the U-shaped line, which engulfs about 90% of the South China Sea. It also impinges on Malaysia's sovereignty claims, the Philippines sovereignty claims, and also Vietnam's. So it's a contentious region. Another map also indicating the 9-dash line and the U-shaped line, with China claims, the region within it is under Chinese sovereignty. So South China Sea is a flashpoint, and we do not know how it will pan out in the future. Let's turn to Japan and Korea. Now, US alliance with both these countries, the US-Japan alliance and US-South Korea alliance, these are alliances that were entered into after the Second World War. And they are important defense and security arrangements between United States, Japan, and Korea, especially on the Korean Peninsula. As you know, there is the problem of the nuclear threat from North Korea. So all US presidents, it's just not Trump and Biden, but everyone, have viewed these two alliances as vital to maintaining US national interests in Asia vis-a-vis the two rival powers in Northeast Asia, that is China and Russia. The US presently has about 50,000 troops in Japan and 28,500 troops in Korea. Now, in a joint statement on the 21st of May, when President Moon Jae-in visited Washington, they both agreed that they have to push harder on the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. In mid-April 2021, as far as US-Japan relations are concerned, President Joe Biden hosted Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga of Japan for his first in-person meeting with a foreign leader as president. So Japan was the first actually to go to Washington. Japan is an ally to meet with the new president. They agreed to strengthen bilateral cooperation on the future of a free and open Indo-Pacific based on a rules-based international order, regional as well as global. Concept of open Indo-Pacific, free and open is fairly new. I would say it's probably been talked about much more only in the last 5 or 6 years. The digital economy and emerging technologies, including 5G, artificial intelligence, semiconductors, and climate, other areas of cooperation. In Korea, like previous US administrations, Washington, as you know, is very concerned about the nuclear threat posed by the North Koreans under leader Kim Jong-un. Efforts, including personal diplomacy of President Trump with the North Korean leader, were undertaken. As you know, Kim Jong-un and President Trump met in Singapore on June 12, 2018. But since then, however, there has really not been any progress under the Trump administration with respect to breaking the deadlock over denuclearizing the Korean Peninsula. The Biden administration, of course, prefers dialogue and diplomatic efforts rather than open military confrontation with North Korea. North Korea, as you know, is also backed by China. So there's a bit of geopolitics involved in the Korean Peninsula. Even Russia has an interest in what's happening in the Korean Peninsula. Let's now look at US-India relations. The United States views India as a major regional power and potential key ally and strategic partner in Southeast Asia. Ideologically, as you know, there is a convergence of interests, especially since both are democracies, and India is the largest and most populous democracy in the world. Biden, like Trump, shares similar strategic views about India's role in Asia. If we take Asia, the only other Asian power that can act as some sort of balance and deterrence to China will be India. Both are very huge civilizations. Their civilizations go back to 5,000 years each. So I always do say in my lectures that even Southeast Asia is impacted by 10,000 years of Asian civilization. 5 from China, 5 from India. And there we are in Southeast Asia. If we are doing well, it's also because of the confluence of these civilizations and the impact they have had on regional security and development and cultural development. There's a certain degree of strategic convergence between the US and India on how they view the China threat in the Indo-Pacific region. This threat, as you know, has been magnified as a result of China's assertive conduct in the South China Sea, especially from 2014. Cumulative attempts to militarize and nationalize the South China Sea. And this has, of course, particularly upset the Quad members, USA, Japan, India, and Austria. Their key concern is freedom of navigation in the open seas and security of sea lanes and maritime routes for international shipping and commerce. So President Biden, like his predecessor Trump, does not see India as threatening the US global role and supremacy, unlike China and Russia, which are seen as major power rivals to the US. However, there are constraints in building strong US-India ties, strengthening the US-India strategic partnership as India rejects hegemonism in international relations. Hence, Washington will have some difficulty attempting to use New Delhi as its surrogate power in Asia, especially to contain China. So under Biden, there'll be more bilateral cooperation, especially on non-traditional security that includes the pandemic, climate change, cyber war, clean energy, ICT cooperation, and so on. Again, just like with China, the United States also has a major trade deficit with India. And one of the issues in the discussion in the economic relations, trade relations, is to try to reduce the deficit. Reason is also because India also has several protective markets, including agriculture, and also in the IT sector, it prefers to make its own rather than import devices from the United States. So there's a bit of mercantilism and economic nationalism combined. During the period of Trump too, he talked about America first again. That is some kind of also a mercantilist approach and a very nationalistic approach. You want to export more, but import less so that you can protect your domestic market. Now, if you take the economic or trade dimension, among India's 4 major trade partners, United States is #1. Yeah? Total trade in 2019-20 was $92 billion US. Second was China, Third was United Arab Emirates, and fourth was Saudi Arabia. So these are the major trading partners of India, as you can see. Hong Kong, Singapore also being important to India. However, there are trade issues, as I mentioned, in the bilateral relationship that crop up from time to time. Market opening. US wants India to open its market more by removing non-tariff barriers. Bilateral trade frictions. Forced localization. As you know, India prefers to put in more local content rather than import from outside the various types of technological products that it produces. The United States continues to press India to address its forced localization practices, because this actually prevents American companies from having trade in these areas, such as in-country data storage. India is quite protective about this. Domestic content and domestic testing requirements, viewed by the United States as presenting barriers to trade with India. Now, India, of course, has been unhappy over President Trump's removal of the generalized system of preferences, GSP status, in 2017 for Indian goods entering the US market. India retaliated by imposing duties on US goods entering the Indian market. Under the GSP, India was the biggest beneficiary, with Indian exports to the US accounting for over a quarter of the goods that got duty-free access into the US in 2017. Of course, the US GSP, as you know, historically has been very helpful to developing countries. But at some point, of course, the US GSP cannot be extended forever as countries develop and they become industrialized and they move out of developing country status. One cannot expect the US to be still extending GSP to them. There are other issues such as agricultural market, access and price control on medical devices, two protectionist devices used by India in the India-US trade. But to sum up, there's a paradox, because while their defense cooperation is increasing, their economic relations are not necessarily parallel to that. And this is, as I mentioned, due to economic nationalism on both sides. And this is a problem that in India-US relations, even President Trump has to deal with. Let me focus now on Pakistan, another country in South Asia. What has been the nature of US relations with Pakistan? This bilateral relationship was strong during the Cold War, when the US was pursuing containment of international communism. And in Asia, communist China was Washington's target. Another major consideration was India's non-aligned, neutral, but I would say pro-Soviet foreign policy. This was viewed negatively by the US, although India was a democracy. That meant greater US strategic convergence with Pakistan. Given the animosities also in the India-Pakistan relationship, the US, of course, could use this as a leverage to be supporting more Pakistan because of the division of opinion and differences and conflict between India and Pakistan. India played a critical role in the breakup of Pakistan when Bangladesh was created in 1971, following the Indo-Pakistan War. The post-Cold War alignment with India following India's rise as a major power resulted in the US reducing its strategic alignment with Pakistan vis-a-vis India. The rise of China also reduced Pakistan's strategic value to the US and raised India's strategic importance in US policy towards South Asia. For obvious reasons, India was a rising power, and you also have to be a performer to be taken seriously. Currently, the US is not too happy about the China-Pakistan economic corridor and Pakistan's closer alignment with Beijing. Another factor, if I might add, impinging on US relations with Pakistan is Islamabad's support for the Taliban in Afghanistan, the harboring of Al-Qaeda fighters, and the training of terrorists who were infiltrated into Kashmir to destabilize India. We have to note also that Osama bin Laden, the mastermind of Al-Qaeda, which reportedly carried out the September 11, 2001 bombings in New York and Washington, D.C., he was hiding near a military base in Abbottabad, Pakistan, when US Special Forces launched a surprise attack on 2nd May 2011 and killed him. Immediately after the 9/11 tragedy, we know what happened. The US led a coalition and overthrew the Taliban in Afghanistan. Taliban ruled Afghanistan from 1996 until 2001. The Soviet Union also quit Pakistan. Soviet Union was there from 1979 to 1989. Then there was another government, Afghan government, but that government couldn't sustain the pressure and the thrust from the Taliban. So for 5 years, they were there. Then the US came in and removed the Taliban regime under the pretext that the Taliban was promoting international terrorism through Al-Qaeda. The role of the army in Pakistan is another complicating factor, as you know. Does the US deal with the Pakistani army, which actually controls Pakistan, or with the civilian leadership, which is known to be subordinate to the army? So thus the complex civil-military relationship in Pakistan, plus the role of the ISI, Inter-Service Intelligence of Pakistan, in Afghanistan, are matters of concern both to the United States and also to India. The truth is that the Pakistani army would like to be the kingmaker in Pakistan. So we'll have to watch how Pakistan-Afghan relations develop, because the Taliban has relied quite heavily on training and support from Pakistan. And Pakistan would like to use Afghanistan like a puppet state. And so there will be this problem also for India as to whether, as a result of that relationship, Indian security can be endangered. In some, US financial support to Pakistan has dropped drastically in the post-Cold War era due to changing priorities. India is seen as strategically more important to the US than Pakistan, which unfortunately has a lingering problem with effective governance, tribal warfare, corruption, Islamic terrorism within its borders, and also manifesting characteristics of a failing state, all making it less useful in US foreign policy priorities. So in the past 2 decades, we can say that with the rise of China and India, Pakistan's leverage in US-India relations also has shrunk considerably. So let's quickly come to the present. In 2001, as you know, after the terrorist attacks, if we look at now Afghanistan alone, US in Afghanistan, the Taliban regime was toppled. And then the United States sent ground troops there. US troops in Afghanistan in support of the pro-American regime of Hamid Karzai totaled over 50,000 by 2010, along with also NATO. NATO troops were also involved. They brought in 32,000 troops. So financially, the United States had spent over $2 trillion for its military presence in Afghanistan, and also to train Afghan troops and to keep the pro-American regime afloat for 20 years. Now, once the US under Trump announced a deadline for US complete troop withdrawal from Afghanistan, of course, the Taliban became emboldened and will just wait to overthrow the pro-American regime following the departure of the US. So this happened just 3 days ago. On 16 August 2021, Afghanistan fell to the Taliban. And the moral of the story is this: all external powers, Britain, the Soviet Union, and now the United States, have fallen victim to Afghan nationalism, and in the case of the Taliban, also supported by Islamic political ideology. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we'll turn to ASEAN, our region. What's the nature of the US relationship with ASEAN? And how do we move from Obama to Trump in terms of their focus in the region? Now, in the post Cold War, as you know, US focused more on building defense capacity of regional allies through the Nixon Doctrine, more burden sharing and partnership. Yeah? US unilateralism under Bush between 2000 and 2008 was due to the 9/11 effect. And you know, President Bush formulated the global war on terror doctrine, doctrine of preemption, yeah, but it was perceived by Muslim majority states like Indonesia, Malaysia, in Southeast Asia as an anti-Islamic campaign. Obama, of course, was more multilateral. He strongly supported the ASEAN Regional Forum, supported ASEAN as a regional grouping, and even endorsed ASEAN's Treaty of Amity and Cooperation in 2009. This is this treaty which talks about non-interference in internal affairs, and ASEAN, it's an ASEAN charter, ASEAN managing on its own and building good relations and effective cooperation among themselves. When President Obama moved or showed more attention to Asia, the US pivot to Asia, and this was because, you know, the United States already had begun winding down in Iraq. There were all these extra troops and deployment facilities that also inspired the US pivot to Asia doctrine. And that also, I think, had to do with also the rise of China, that the United States wanted to increase its political, military, economic balance in Asia through the pivot to Asia. US also joined the East Asia Summit, which is ASEAN centered. Mainly ASEAN 10 plus China, Japan, and Korea. And now, of course, other external powers have also joined the EAS. That would include India, Japan, Russia, United States, and so on. Now, the China threat, Obama viewed India, Japan, Australia, and ASEAN as counterweights to Chinese power in Asia. This view is shared by both Trump and Biden. The United States, of course, supports multilateralism in counterterrorism strategy, including defeating the ISIS, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, or what they call it there, Daesh, in Southeast Asia. Biden will do more to help Southeast Asian countries fight the pandemic. He has already donated vaccines to Malaysia. I can get some water. Donated vaccines to Malaysia since the arrival of the new US ambassador in February 2021. And Ambassador Brian McFetus is here now as the current US ambassador in Malaysia. US, of course, will focus on capacity building efforts in ASEAN, especially in the areas of cyber terrorism, fighting the global pandemic, disaster relief, and maritime security. All right, let's look at US-ASEAN relations from Trump to Biden. Now, President Trump, as you know, from 2017 to 2020, did not really pay very much attention to ASEAN, and also skipped key regional meetings such as the ASEAN Regional Forum, the East Asia Summit, and other meetings that are central to ASEAN functioning. Trump was more interested in security issues such as North Korea nuclear threat to the US and China's economic threat to the US. He was also not known, by the way, for his knowledge and experience in international relations and diplomacy compared to President Obama and now, of course, President Biden. Both the Democratic presidents are definitely much more schooled in foreign policy, diplomacy, and international relations. More attention to ASEAN. ASEAN via foreign aid. Now, this will include development assistance.
I was just the last point I was making was, okay, what is the performance? Yeah, the United States and the Biden said they'll do this, that, and the other, but can they link promise to performance in the last 8 months that Biden has been the president? So let me see how he has handled ASEAN and what are the commitments to Southeast Asia U.S. policy in this region. Yeah. So on 29th of July to 31st of July, which is just last month, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin visited Singapore, Vietnam, and the Philippines to strengthen security ties. So they're actually putting their money where their mouth is. Then August 2nd, 2021, U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken hosted virtual meeting of the Mekong-U.S. partnership. That is to say, the United States plus 5 lower Mekong countries, Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, Thailand, and Vietnam, launched by President Trump in 2020. As you know, this is continental Southeast Asia. There is also, a link to China's own engagement in the Mekong, and the United States wants to make sure that China doesn't eat up the entire cake. U.S.-ASEAN relations from Trump to Biden. Okay, then August 3rd, which is this month, 2021, Blinken attended the U.S.-ASEAN foreign ministers meeting and pledged support for the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific. And on 6th of August, 3 days later, Blinken attended the virtual meeting of the ASEAN Regional Forum. This is the multilateral security dialogue forum for the Asia Pacific, which was set up in 1994. And he said the U.S. as the largest supporter of the COVAX facility. This is the agency that is worldwide distributing the COVAX, yes, the COVID-19 vaccines. The United States has donated to COVAX more than 23 million vaccine doses and nearly $160 million in assistance to ASEAN member states to fight the pandemic. Now, Blinken also announced a donation of $500,000 to the ASEAN COVID-19 Response Fund. Blinken also said U.S. priorities are to support sustainable energy, smart cities initiatives, human capital development, especially for the youth in Southeast Asia. This is a program that was started by President Obama, the YCD, Young Southeast Asian Leadership Initiative, to train young Southeast Asian leaders in government and governance and management of the country when they become leaders. So this is there's a focus on human capital development, which I think President Biden will further enhance. Now, with respect to the United States and Indonesia, of course, the cooperation is intensifying. And on August 4th, 2021, they launched the Garuda Shield military exercise, the largest ever U.S.-Indonesian naval exercise. So you can see the United States is sort of getting more involved in the regional security scenario in Southeast Asia through the ASEAN partners. August 5th, 2021, Blinken attended the East Asia Summit meeting. August 6th, he attended the ASEAN Regional Forum. And then in just 2 days' time, the U.S. Vice President will be coming to Singapore to strengthen the 1990 Memorandum of Understanding. It's a security relationship between the United States and Singapore. So that partnership is going to be strengthened. And also then followed by a visit to Vietnam. Vietnam is very critical, as you know, in the South China Sea claims issue, to discuss Indo-Pacific security. Vietnam, and the Philippines have some serious issues with China of the South China Sea claims. All right, so we come to the conclusion, thankfully, that the internet was not interrupted much earlier. Yeah. Okay, U.S. power in Asia. First, the United States will remain a major Asia Pacific power. The Biden administration is committed to re-engage with Asia and support Asian multilateralism with allies. But so far, however, there has been no movement yet on rejoining the Trans-Pacific Partnership or even the comprehensive program for Trans-Pacific Partnership. Because there is still a bit of the economic nationalism lingering on. United States is worried that somehow the balance will favor the countries of the membership rather than itself. And they will benefit more from entering the U.S. economy than the other way around. On U.S. relations with allies, Japan and South Korea, Biden will strengthen strategic cooperation, keeping in mind that they are vital partners in containing the influence of China and Russia in Northeast Asia. However, he will be less confrontational in dealing with Beijing. On South Asia, Biden will have to make a hard assessment on the long-term consequences of the fall of Afghanistan and how the U.S. will engage with India as a strong strategic partner and also with Pakistan, whose ISI, Inter-Service Intelligence, is apparently having a strong influence on the Taliban. He will also step up political and economic cooperation with India, as New Delhi is equally concerned over the fallout from the collapse of the pro-American regime in Kabul. Now, on U.S. relations with ASEAN, Biden will follow more closely Obama's approach, viewing the regional grouping as pivotal to regional security and stability. He will also play a more active role in deterring China's advances in the South China Sea. Finally, the Biden relations with Asia will be more predictable. Cooperation with allies will be done more diplomatically, and U.S. economic, political, and military diplomacy will be strengthened more by multilateral strategies of cooperation rather than by unilateral or transactional diplomatic approaches, which was the characteristic of Trump's foreign affairs, transactional diplomacy. And I think that one has been jettisoned. All right, so if we were to compare Trump and, of course, and Biden, we can say that in globalism, there was less focus by Trump on globalism for sure. His foreign policy was truncated by a selective approach to selective issues. He was also less involved in internationalism. He had less concern for global issues such as the COVID-19 pandemic and its implications for international security. And thirdly, he was also not too much of a fan of multilateralism. There was actually very little evidence of a multilateral approach to peace and security, such as support for regional and international organizations, including the UN, to resolve international issues. And Trump did the other thing actually, he withdrew from some international organizations, including the WHO. Trump was more inclined towards bilateralism and peaceful approach to international relations. Comparison, also under Biden, there is already evidence of discussion with world leaders on how to resolve the global pandemic. Biden has also shown greater respect for the role of the United Nations and regional organizations such as ASEAN. Biden will engage more effectively with ASEAN in Southeast Asia. He believes in multilateral diplomacy to promote U.S. national interests. Now, Biden, in terms of performance, we talked about promise and performance. These were also his campaign promises. He has rejoined the World Trade Organization, rejoined Paris Climate Accord, rejoined the World Health Organization, WHO, renewed the START Treaty, Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty with Russia until 2026, lifted the ban on US entry from Muslim majority countries, restored America's commitment to democracy, human rights, and rule of law, and Biden also reaffirmed the trust and commitment to US alliances in Europe and Asia. And of course, he is going to be much more diplomatic with how he deals with allies compared to Trump. He has dropped Trump's America First slogan and replaced it with America is back and diplomacy is back. So finally, under Biden, there will be more bureaucratic stability in the US and greater professionalism in the way America handles its global role and interests. Unlike Trump, there will be more certainty than uncertainty in US foreign policy. In sum, Biden began his presidency by, number one, stabilizing the US bureaucracy, two, recommitting US support for international institutions, three, advocating multilateral diplomacy, not transactional diplomacy, and four, jettisoning Trump's brinkmanship and unilateralism. Well, that's the end of my lecture, friends. I will now turn it over to our moderator, and be very happy to take the Q&A, and hopefully we'll have some interesting comments or issues to raise. Thank you for your patience.
Okay. Thanks, Prof. Nathan. Here we have some questions, but because we have, it's almost 3:40 now, so maybe you can make the answer not to be too long. Okay. Question posed by Gerard George.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay. So there's a question by Gerard George, but you did mention about this. Maybe you want to add on, because he asked about the Vice President Harris will be visiting Singapore and Vietnam. Okay, so he wants to know any view on what might be her focus on talks during her visit.
I would say that security will be really the primary consideration here. US viewing ASEAN, I think it is seeing the Biden as a very important and valuable security partner for the US, especially given the South China Sea issues, and also, China's assertive conduct in the South China Sea. Clearly, there needs to be a coordination on the part of the US with ASEAN friends who are also equally concerned about what is happening in the South China Sea. As you know, the South China Sea, incidentally, is closer to Vietnam, to Indonesia, to Brunei, and Malaysia and the Philippines. Then the coast of China is to the South China Sea. So quite clearly, these are important claimants, and they feel that the best approach will be to share the resources and not for anyone to totally monopolize the resources or nationalize and militarize the South China Sea. I think the United States and also the Quad members are on the same platform with ASEAN on this. There is also France, Germany, Australia, Canada, all showing interest in developments in the South China Sea. So I would say that Vice President Kamala Harris will be talking about this in Singapore, and especially also with Vietnam, about how they can provide a more coordinated response and provide a stronger deterrence to China and send a message to China that it should not be expanding its presence or influence in the South China Sea.
Okay, thanks, Professor Nathan. I hope Professor has answered your questions. Next question is posted by SK Lee. This participant has quite an interesting question here. So the question is, will China attack Taiwan? Okay, what is the Biden administration doing about it? It's more about the Taiwan Strait.
It is Yeah, good question. Yeah, because Taiwan has been coming up as an issue recently, and even Japan seems to be changing its policy towards Taiwan, saying that it is not recognizing the one China policy anymore. Right? So that is an issue, and it's a sensitive issue for China, of course, because China has always seen Taiwan as part of China. But over from 1949 until now, we also have to keep in mind that Taiwan has evolved its own independent existence, politically, economically, culturally, and also internationally. So there is an issue here. It's not so clear cut that just because China says, Taiwan is a part of it. One has to find out whether the people of Taiwan also support reintegration with China. That really is an issue, isn't it? That there has to be a referendum to see, because they have evolved on their own for the last 50 years, more than 50 years, 60 years almost. So that I think is an important consideration. My own take is that I don't think it is in the interest of China or even in the US to trigger a major conflict or war in Northeast Asia. The cost will be great. The way out is, China one thing, they also can be patient. Remember, India and China, these are 5,000 years civilization. They have a lot of patience and they have a better perspective of history. China will be quite willing to exercise patience and wait. Just like as the Taliban did the same thing in Afghanistan. They knew at some point the United States is going to quit, and all you have to do is just remain patient because you are there, you're in your own country, and the time will come when the external powers just don't have the stamina to stay on, and then you can make it move. Yeah. So I think at the moment restraint will be the best approach, which I think is the case for both the China and the United States. Neither will really be interested in starting any conflict now. They will be also consumed by the COVID-19 pandemic. That will finish them off first, then the actual.
Okay. Yeah, Prof.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, actually, my place also you can hear, it start raining now, so I'm not sure whether it would affect the quality of the audio or not. Is it okay? Someone can answer. Can you hear the audio clearly, especially Prof. Naden? Because mine is through. It's like directly to the phone, so I'm not sure, but here it's like, can hear. Yeah. They say it's still good. It's still good. So I will try to ask another two.
Another one or two.
Yeah, one or two questions. Yeah. Yes. Next question is posted by May Lee. She asked it. Where. Because she noticed that actually, from your explanation, there's more continuity rather than change in foreign policies between Trump and Biden. So why, that's why she asked why there's more continuity rather than change.
That's actually a very good observation on her part, because in foreign policy, there always has been more continuity than change in U.S. foreign policy. You may have either the Republican or the Democrat in power, but the change is only in terms of emphasis or style of doing the foreign policy. But the interests have remained the same. That is why there has been more continuity in the way the U.S., let us say, looks at North Korea. The nuclear threat is there, whether Democratic or Republican administration. That threat is there to U.S. national security. Russia as a rival power also same. Yeah, the political class in the United States clearly views Russia as more as a threat rather than as a friend. So those things tend to continue. It's just that whether they will be more confrontational or less confrontational. South China Sea, a great convergence of strategic interests and strategic perspectives, regardless of the U.S. administration. So again, continuity. With respect to Japan and Korea, I think whether you have a Republican or whether you have a Democrat, it is quite clear that they see great value in the strategic alliance, even regional security and stability there. ASEAN, I think, is also seen in a similar light. They see ASEAN as a valuable partner and friend. ASEAN really doesn't make too much of trouble, as you know. So troublesome regions, yeah, they attract attention, but the attention will be very negative and the situation gets worse. But basically in Southeast Asia, if at all the attention is being attracted, it's a more positive attention because we also are managing our region well, and we as far as possible avoid creating any power vacuums in the region. Because once you create a power vacuum, outsiders and all will try to come and fill it, and usually they do not fill it in with good content. And then the problem, gets worse and worse and unmanageable. So in that sense, yes, I would agree that there has been more continuity rather than discontinuity. Trump was not very much an internationalist, but he also undertook certain international initiatives and so on. But he wasn't, because by training, he's not really a diplomat. He was not really schooled in the foreign service or in the American bureaucracy or political system. He actually is an outsider, So even in the Republican Party, he had more enemies than friends, I would say. So they are, that's more about style, presidential style and so on. But in terms of US national interest, I think they tended to reflect much more continuity than discontinuity.
Okay, thanks, Prof. I think it would be better that I would ask the last questions because I have notification saying that my line also is not very stable. So we will have to, because it's heavy rain here. So yeah, so sorry for that because I can see like participants are posting more and more questions coming in, but then I will have to ask the last question. So the last question here I choose is more on
another webinar later. But yeah, you can go ahead as the moderator. You have the prerogative.
Okay. Maybe the last question, we will focus on asking, I would take this question that asks on how, what would be, Biden's option to counter China influence in Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Middle East beside trade, technology, and diplomacy war. Is currency or financial war will happen next?
Yeah, see, the thing is, we have to recognize that, during this Hong Kong, all the riots that were going on, I knew very well that it cannot go on for too long, because at the end of the day, you have to recognize the fact that Hong Kong is already part of China. And to tell the government of China, that they should, pursue a particular political that path, by outsiders, it's quite difficult actually. You have to recognize that in the end, Chinese sovereignty will fully prevail in Hong Kong. Because of its, experience under Britain, and it had a different political legal system. The time period given was 50 years, but of course we have not reached the 50 years, right? So that is why people are making noise that the Chinese government is not keeping its promise. But I would still put it this way, the bus has already left the station and it is not going to return. So we have to come to terms with the fact that China's sovereignty will prevail much more completely as more time goes. Yeah, so I have no issue with that. Now, Taiwan is a little more complicated. I think we discussed that. Whether the Taiwanese people, they are running a very good government on their own, a very good economy, and I think they have developed their own foreign affairs capabilities and so on. So that's a much more tricky issue, and you can't really solve it by force. If you try to do that, that could be a world war. I don't think the US just simply going to be quiet and allow China to just walk in there. I don't see that happening. Then there's one more region, Middle East.
Yes.
In the Middle East, remember the US has strategic interest in the region. Apart from the fact that it has got many regimes there that are actually pro-West, pro-American. All the monarchies are actually pro-American. So the United States will be supporting them. Saudi Arabia, Jordan, UAE, and so on. So that will be there, especially as well as economic interest. United States also will not want Iran to gain too much of an influence in that region. So there is also the competition for power and rivalry between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is an ally of the US. So, and also there's been a lot of bad blood between US and Iran, after the Shah fell, and then the revolutionaries took over, Iranian revolutionaries took over, they also detained several Americans for quite a number of days, and that bitter feeling is still there. So then in the broader spectrum of the Middle East, United States, has got obligations to defend Israel. So no matter what happens, I think the US political system will completely support Israeli independence and sovereignty, and any attempt sort of destabilize Israel or to start a war in Israel will definitely evoke reactions from the United States, and the United States will clearly be on the side of Israel. So that's the scenario.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Professor Nandan. I think today we will have to end it here. Okay, but before we wrap up everything, I hope that everyone can just on your camera so that we can take a group photo. And it's a bit too bad that because Professor Nandan is on the phone, so he can't join us on for the group photo. But I just hope that maybe next time when the pandemic has gone, we can organize a physical seminar, and then we will invite Professor Nandan to come, at least we can have some face-to-face so that we don't have such disruption anymore. Okay.
All right, thank you, everyone.